Thank you very much, Steve, and welcome everyone. This is a great turnout, and I'm honored to be able to be the lead-off keynote and to work with you these next 2 days and learn together. I want to situate the work that we've been doing so that we understand how well grounded it is. Steve, near the end, talked about our emphasis on doing, and that's where I want to start. There's nothing that I will say to you that we're not actually doing day after day in partnerships with schools and school systems and communities. So everything is based on that premise. I don't know whether you heard the story of the incurable academic, I'll call him, a professor of education, who was taken out to a highly effective school and shown around all day, really great things going on. And at the end of the day, somebody asked him what he thought, and he said, well, it's all well and good, but will it work in theory? Right? Will it work in theory? We only want it to work in practice because we know the theory will take care of itself. I'll talk about we, so I want to define that. There are about a dozen of us that are mixing and matching on projects around the world, again, all grounded in action. And in this team, and there's really two sub-teams, but there's overlap, we have people at what I would call the policy level or the strategy level. Myself, Andy Hargraves, based in Boston, but works closely with us. Greg Butler, who's based in Seattle. So a few of us are, let's call it the macro level, although everybody crosses lines in this. We have people who, 3 or 4 people at what we call capacity building. Capacity building, and you'll hear me talk about it, is about developing the skills and competencies that you need to be effective. I usually put that knowledge, skills, and competencies in one of 2 bins, knowledge bins, let's call it action bins. One of them is pedagogy, what you need to know about ever effective pedagogical relationships with students, for example. The second bin is change, which I'll also spell out. Change is what you need to know in order to be able to get things implemented in a way, in a widespread and a deep way. So the change knowledge is quite substantial that we have. So we've got people at that level. We have researchers that are, again, not researchers that are distant from practice, but immersed in practice. For example, Santiago Rincon Gallardo, who just, from Mexico, did his work with Richard Elmore in Harvard and came to live in Toronto, and he's worked with us on full time. So you get the idea of this mix and match about activities that are surrounding all the things we do. And I want to also, because I'm going to talk a little bit about, at the beginning for the next, say, 5-7 minutes, about the frames of the work we're doing, I want to make sure that, that you understand that is very much grounded on day-to-day practice. So we call it working at the macro level and the micro level simultaneously and connecting the two. So let me give you an idea of the projects. And I'm only going to talk about projects where we have a linkage to the system, usually the province, the state, the country, a linkage to whatever regional networks there are, school districts or sometimes networks of schools, and then a linkage, of course, to schools and communities. And we really, in one sense, got the basis of this. And this work that I'm talking about is only about 15 years old. We can trace pieces of it for the past 100 years, but putting it together, and the work you'll hear from others who are speaking in the 2 days, has only been fairly recent. And we cut our teeth on this in England, in Tony Blair's first term, 1997, where he and his chief strategist, Michael Barber, took on for the first time a deliberate attempt to change the whole system, in that case primary schools, improving literacy and numeracy across the 20,000 or more schools. So this was an ambitious undertaking. It was deliberate, and Tony Blair said, we're going to actually use the change knowledge to help us do this. And they commissioned a team of us in Toronto, where I'm based, to evaluate it. So we evaluated this from 1998 to 2002. And we drew 4 lessons from it, 2 things not to do and 2 things to do. So we sorted that out. The 2 things not to do was to be obsessive about targets where they said 85% numeracy, or literacy, I should say, and targets from starting at 50 or 60%. There's not so much wrong with targets. We do a bit of it ourselves, but they have to be shaped together. And you can't be obsessive about them because they start to corrupt what you do in order to meet the targets, including cheating to make yourself look better. So we said, don't obsess on targets. The second thing we said was, don't engage in punitive accountability. This is accountability that's very negative. That says we reward people who do well, we'll punish people who don't do so well. That's not a very good way to motivate people. You can see it right away. People are not necessarily motivated to put in a lot of new energy if they're told they're not very good at what they're doing. It's not a good motivator. So he said, don't do those two things. But there were two things that they did do that were impressive. One was to invest in capacity building. So capacity building in their case was resources and ideas about skills, coaching, for example, new roles for leadership at the school level, roles that were much more organized to be supportive and collaborative to try to bring about changes at the different levels. And the second thing they did was they stayed with the priorities. We call it a small number of ambitious goals that you stay with. And so they didn't jump from one priority to another. They stayed in those first 4 or 5 years with that very priority. So that kind of continuity of commitment instead of changing every couple of years. So that was great. We understood that. And then coincidentally, and a good coincidence, is when we finished that study in Ontario, which is the largest province in Canada. There are 10 provinces and some territories. And each province is entirely autonomous educationally. So when I say Ontario, I mean it's in charge of its own education activities. And Ontario is somewhat, I guess it's large enough, 13 million people, 5,000 schools, 72 districts. Nearly all the pupils are in the public system, although we fund the Catholic system and the public system together. So that was the premier, and Steve referred to him, Dalton McGuinty, came in as an opposition leader. The year before, he said, I want to be the education leader of the province. We know that everything is flat-lined here. Literacy is like this, numeracy is like this, high school graduation is stuck. So we want to take and do something about this. So he hired me, or appointed me as an advisor. And when he got elected in October 2003, we had a green light, let's say, to actually do this in a better way, learning from the English experience. So we did that, and I'll refer a little bit to Liz. I don't want to dwell on that. My point is, we've learned it from the ground up. So we took that system and we said, we're going to use good things from the English lessons. One being capacity building will be our major strategy. And the second, we will stay with the priorities, and we named 3 priorities. Improve literacy and numeracy, that was a cluster. So one priority, improve it from flat line. Increased high school graduation. It was at 68% when we started. And the third priority was a little harder to measure, but it is measurable, is to increase the public's confidence in the public school system. So we took those 3 things. And that's what we've been doing the last 11 years. Literacy has certainly gone up substantially. High school graduation gone from 68 to 83%. And so you get a lot of, because there's a lot of ownership, we've learned a lot about doing this. Now I know that system is different than what you have in Argentina, for example, in other countries, so I don't want to, we're not going from Ontario to the rest of the world. We're saying what we did in Ontario, we borrowed from English education, we borrowed from research around the world, and we used the best that we could find and made our own version of it. As we did this, and it started to work, and it worked within about a year and a half, and so it's been cumulative and it's working. We have another premier now from the same party, and we continue to work, so we have another 4 years of these good circumstances. So that'll be quite a long time to consolidate this. And then, and now I won't want to, I just want to select the pieces around the world and where we have this similar relationship, not living there, of course, but this similar joint mandate. to team up with the system and to link what the system is doing with what happens in the classroom in the schools. One of the places we have massive involvement now is California. California is complex, to say the least. Now, we just finished working with 72 districts, and we moved to California. There's 1,009 districts. There are more people in California than there are in Canada, 38 to 40 million people. The last 30 years or so, California has been what we would call a basket case. I don't know what the translation is, but they've been not doing much and getting worse and all kinds of complexity. But they have a new governor and a new combination, and again, I won't dwell on this other than to say is what we now are engaged in for the last 2 years, and certainly the next 4 years, the governor will get reelected in November, is developing whole system change in California by mobilizing and developing things that work for people at the school and the regional level. I want to talk just a moment about thinking about the whole system in the 3 levels. Let's call it the center, the middle level, which is the region or the district or the network, whatever organization, and the 3rd level is the school. If you think about how do you shape change in a way that works on a really wide basis, we know some things now, 3 things I'll say, and the 3rd one being positive. One is that top-down change doesn't work. So people have tried to do that for a long time. We know the best ideas, let's put them in practice and let's make sure they happen. So that doesn't work. The second doesn't work is bottom-up change if you think that each school will develop on its own. If you leave schools to develop on its own, some will, some won't, they won't stay. So bottom-up change doesn't have much leverage. And the changes that we're working on now, we actually call it, although on all the solutions, all 3 levels are involved, we call it leadership from the middle, a term that Andy and his team coined when they evaluated 10 districts in Ontario 3 or 4 years ago. And leadership from the middle is based on the following assumption. One is the top can't make it work. Number 2, the bottom can't make it work, but what does the middle look like when you strengthen it? So for us, the middle has 2 versions. If you're in a system that has a lot of districts, the way that North America is organized, we have the middle are the districts. So for example, in California, the big strategy we have is districts learning from each other. School districts, clusters of 4, 5, 10, whatever they are, and that you build up the capacity of the middle to strengthen itself by, we call it use the group to change the group. Lateral learning, purposeful, focused, etc. And so that's one version. If you're in a country that doesn't have districts, the middle are school networks. So that, concrete example, we're now working in New Zealand. New Zealand, 25 years ago, established a policy called Tomorrow's Schools. And in that policy, they said, we'll take back our district or regional authority, and we'll give every school, 2,500 schools, the authority to run themselves. Their own board, appoint your own principals and teachers, school autonomy. And so they did that, and it was exciting in some ways because it was such a breakthrough strategy at the time. But since then, the schools in New Zealand have drifted apart. Some did well, some didn't do so well, so the gap got larger. The gap between the high and low performance, which has a number of negative consequences. So the government now wants to tighten it up, if you like, and they have a new proposal, and we're working with both the government and the schools on this, where the answer, so to speak, is how do we network our schools so that 10, 15, 12, whatever the number is, all 2,500 schools are part of a network where you design the network to learn from each other with very specific resources, specific goals, and detail about what to do that. They're just starting this, and it's political as well as it is everywhere when you do something new. The politics are this. The government, which is a right of center government, says we want to tighten up, and therefore, and we're going to give you some money to do that. We're going to invest money. So they've done that part. The schools are saying we've enjoyed 25 years of autonomy. We don't want to be tightened up by the government. We want we like our autonomy, even though we know it doesn't work fully, so give us the money and let us figure it out. Of course, the government says, we're not going to give you the money because we don't, it'll get wasted. We have to know that it's going to work. So this is the dilemma now in New Zealand, is how do you take this very good idea of schools learning from each other and make it work? When the starting point is mutual mistrust. Mistrust from the schools to the government and vice versa. So that's a very good example of this. So I could go on, and with the other one, the last one I'll mention is Uruguay, where I'm going tomorrow. We have a project there in partnership with CEBAL, which is the arm's length government agency that's charged with implementing new technology across the country. And we've been working there the last 2 years, and will for the next 3 or so years on, it's easy to start with the technology, as you'll see, and I'll concentrate on that in the keynote at the end of the day. But how do you figure out the pedagogy? How do you figure out where to go from there to ensure that there's really strong pedagogy? And also, how do you figure out the change problem, which is it's not just success in a few schools, it's success in all of the schools. How do you do that with limited resources? So that's a great project. We love that partnership, and we're going to do it. I put a few contact points on the screen there that you have. My website, the first one, you can download nearly all of the slides I'll use today. I'll say about 85% of them are on the website. You can go to under handouts and you'll find them there. A lot of other things too, including some films we're doing, 10-minute clips on what this looks like in practice at different levels. The Spanish publisher Murata just published recently Andy and my book on professional capital. I'm going to refer to the content of that in the course of this first keynote. And they're also just about to release the publication of the second book, which is called The Principle, the one at the very bottom, 3 Keys for Maximizing Impact, that will be in Spanish and released in the next month or two. The newpedagogies.org, I'll define it a little bit towards the end of this session, but it's the substance of the keynote late this afternoon, so we won't delve into that. The ideas from the book Stratosphere, those integrating pedagogy, technology, and change knowledge also are part of that part this afternoon. The two keynotes relate to each other in the following way. In this first part, I want to nail down the change capacity, knowledge, and concepts, and not so much dwell on technology. A little bit, but not so much. This afternoon, I want to apply that knowledge to the pedagogy side, and the part that we're able to really try out. It may just describe the project because it so much reflects the grounded development with big system intentions. In that project, and it's now about 6 months old, we are recruiting, it's almost finished. On the average, 10 clusters of 100 schools from 10 different countries. So 1,000 schools on the average. Some have 110, some have 90, whatever. And in each case, these countries that have signed on, Uruguay is one, Canada, especially Ontario, a dozen districts there, Australia, Tasmania, and Victoria have teamed up for 100 schools, Netherlands, Finland. When you think of Finland as a top performer, they do not do much with technology, and it's starting to be a problem. They're starting to fall behind, and how to work with technology is a big issue. And Singapore is about to join. Scotland is joining. And I'm not sure about England, but Scotland, as usual, independent. But we'll see how independent they are in the next week or so. So this is great because now, and you can see with this, and although this afternoon I'll give you the ideas that form the foundation of the strategy, the substance of it is created in a kind of living laboratory of learning by the 1,000 schools and clusters and cluster leaders and ourselves interacting to do it and shape it and get better at it and describe it and create it by doing it. So that's very consistent with our own attempt to want to do this. This is what I've been saying in one way. We want to focus on practice, doing. We want practice driving theory, pushing upward into better ideas, but always grounded. We like to have, and I know this is, for this group, not so automatically translatable, we like to have a whole system focus because if you can't get the system to get its act together, everything is undercut. If you're in a country like this where there's a lot of, I guess I'll say a lack of system focus, I'm leaving town tomorrow so I can say that, a lack of system focus, that you can't depend on the system. So then we say depend on yourself as a school, but then make sure you connect to other schools, because the cluster, the leadership from the middle, is where you will get some ideas and some even political strength. So we like to have bump up the focus of it on the system, and we always like to focus precisely, I'm going to say, causally on pedagogy. The words instruction and pedagogy tend to be used interchangeably by us, but we do mean pedagogy. We do mean precision. We do mean what Jay is going to talk about, the design of this, so that this has to be increasingly precise. We like to be precise, not to be prescriptive, but to be clear. That's why we want to be precise. To be clear. Does it work? What does it look like? What does it feel like? Does it produce results? So that's what we're going to look at. Here's a definition of change that I think I want to highlight, and I'll come back to it with a lot of examples. I like to simplify. We borrowed a word from Jeff Kluger. He wrote a book that's called Simplexity. Simplexity is not a real word, but it's a concept, and it fits for us because simplexity means the simple part is there are a small number of things you have to get right. I'd say about half a dozen. Make sure you get those right. Make sure that they're deeply pursued. That's the simple part. The complex part is how do you make them integrate? How do you make them gel when there are personalities in politics? So very, very difficult to be able to do that. And that's what we've been doing. Now think of the change definition I've just used, and I'll come back to this in a quadrant later. A good change process shapes and reshapes good ideas. So the ideas are not static. They get shaped and they reshape while they develop capacity and ownership in the group. Even that sentence is simplexity, because you can take a good idea, okay, shape and reshape it, but how do you get ownership? How do you get really the skills and capacities? And we use the term motion leadership to describe some of this. But motion leadership is the kind of leadership that causes this to happen. If you're a school principal, a teacher, leader, or in this system, if you can cause this to happen, you're a good change leader. And it's a very sophisticated, even though it's only got two parts, very sophisticated development process itself. So I'll unpack that with you. When the quality system, and this, you can see this slide from my website. Don't worry about all the pieces. I'm just trying to give you a frame for it to begin with. Characteristics of a quality system, and they're not in order. You don't do them 1, 2, 3 to 8. You do them foster deep commitment to moral imperative. We've written about the moral imperative. The moral imperative is this. It's your individual commitment to raise the bar and close the gap for all the children you're working with. So your individual commitment is your moral imperative. And when we do workshops, we would at this stage have you meet in groups of 3 and address the following 3 questions to each other. What is your moral imperative, your personal moral imperative you think about going to work tomorrow? Number 1 question. Number 2 question, to what extent do you think your moral imperative is shared with other people you're working with? You might find that you don't know, or it's all different. Is it shared? Because shared has to be there. And third is, how do you know you're getting anywhere? Tell me the data that will convince me that you're progressing, that you started back here 2 years ago and now you're farther along. There may be still problems, but that explicit accountability of getting somewhere. So we actually call it moral imperative realized, because we want it just not on paper, but is it being accomplished? A small number of ambitious goals. You heard that Ontario, literacy, numeracy, high school graduation, and public confidence in the public system. We just added early learning, so 4, 5, 6. It doesn't mean you don't do anything else, but it means there's certain goals that are highlighted. There's certain clusters of goals, because they're not just narrow goals. They feed onto each other. So small numbers, stay with it instead of jumping around with ideas after ideas, and then you get too many initiatives, overload, lack of coherence, and others. Invest in capacity building from day 1. When people build capacity, they build clarity, they build skills. When they build skills and clarity, they build ownership. When they build those together, they increase collective efficacy and they get results. Build leadership at all levels. I mean, teacher leaders, student leaders these days with their pedagogy, and also certainly school administrative leaders. We're going to delve into the school leadership side in a moment. Cultivate wide engagement. This has to be wide engagement because it won't amount to any kind of substance unless the vast majority of people are doing it. Learn from the work. This is when I say, and I'll come back to the phrase, if you want to change the group, use the group to change the group. That's a very powerful statement, and we'll show what that looks like. Actually, show you a short video in the course of the next 45 minutes. So use the group to change the group, which means you're learning from each other and you're learning from the practice. Or if you're in one school and you're trying to solve a problem, let me put it this way, even though I'm a researcher, if I'm dealing with a very difficult problem, I will not go to the research to find the answer. That will not be my first step. I will say, who else is doing this at another school where it's really working? And then we'll go and visit them and learn from it. And then I'll go to their theory, because then I can connect it for more specificity. So we always learn from the work. Use data, ongoing data, to improve practice, very important. Sometimes there's not enough data, but mostly these days there's too much. So how do you sort that out and have meaningful data that you can use on a day-to-day basis? And monitor for improvement and innovation. Not just improvement, but how do we keep innovating as we go from this? So let's now get into a little more of the frame. I'm going to show you something here. This will be the last macro thing, I guess I'll say, at least at this level. I want to show you something that I call the right and wrong drivers. I did a paper 4 years ago. You can download it from my website or just Google it. It's called Choosing the Wrong Drivers for Whole System Reform. And the definition of driver is policy. A policy is a driver. The strategies that go with the policies are the drivers. And the policy, the driver is intended literally to drive things towards greater improvement. A wrong driver is when you do actually have a policy, you do state it, you do implement it, and it's not very effective. So down the right-hand side, this is our cumulative knowledge about the drivers that policymakers tend to choose, but they actually don't work. And so we take the four of them. Punitive accountability, I've already said, doesn't work because it doesn't motivate people. Another one, the second one that doesn't work is more subtle. If you invest in the individual professional development of teachers, individual. If you say we want better individuals into teaching and into school leadership, we call that human capital. It's not a driver. Individuals don't change cultures. Cultures change individuals. So you have to rebalance that by going to the left side. Doesn't mean we don't do human capital. Obviously we do. We just say policymakers tend to keep going to that, and they don't really have much possibility. And everywhere you see it in plans for teacher excellence. I was in Bogota earlier this year, and they had just launched, I was there to help launch a study that they had completed that was called Achieving Excellence in Teaching. And you read that report, what they did was they studied systems around the world, and they came up with a number of recommendations that said we need more excellent teachers, and therefore we're going to focus on the following number of things. They were all individualistic. How do we attract individuals? They didn't have any kind of groundedness or likelihood that it would actually turn into reality. Third one, although I'll balance it more later because this afternoon we're learning to use technology, is technology as a driver is not a very good driver. There's one word that you can sum up to, if you want to summarize the technology strategy of almost all systems I know in the world in the last 10 years, their strategy. And the word has only 3 letters, B-U-Y. You buy it. And you buy more of it because that way you're more modern. You keep buying it. But as a driver, all you end up with is what you bought on the shelf usually. And it's not very much used. So you want to reverse that. We'll come to that. And then ad hoc strategies don't work as well. The rest of the the time I have with you now, I'm going to focus on the left-hand column, which are the combination of right drivers. I've already defined capacity building. Secondly, we're going to define teamness and collaborative work very carefully. Thirdly, we're going to get into pedagogy. I hope Jay and others will build on that. I know they will. And then a bit of an odd word, systemness, that I'll come back to. So let's think of that as the framework that we have as we go into this and figure out how do we go from here. One other crucial point. You could probably say to me, almost everyone in this room, our country is full of wrong drivers. Right-hand side. That's what our country does. Instantly, if you say to me, why do policymakers choose wrong drivers when we know they don't work? I think the answer is pretty simple. A combination of things. One, because they can. They're in power. Number two, because they can legislate it. Doesn't mean it's implemented, but they can legislate it. It looks good on paper. Number three, because they can make it look acceptable to the public superficially. It sounds good. Let's have better teachers. Sounds great. So that's that. And a fourth one, if you want to get more sinister, is that the people developing the policies really do not care that much about the public system. They wouldn't mind if it was all taken over by businesses. It may help your group actually with good schools, and then that's another issue we can get into. How do individual good schools start to network? Even if, or especially if you're independent schools, private schools. So they've done this, but the other practical thing I wanted to say is about mindset. You know Carl Dweck about this. In this, I want to apply it to the wrong drivers column in two ways. One is, if you're saddled with the wrong drivers, the mindset that you need to come to has two pieces. One is that you are stuck with the policies, but you're not stuck with the mindset. You can have your own mindset in the face of external policies. If the policy is negative on accountability, you can say in your school, in your system, we're going to make it work developmentally. Not punitively, but developmentally. We're going to figure that out. And that's what actually people do to adapt to it. The other thing that's I find helpful as a mindset is, instead of thinking it's my job to implement government policy, or instead of thinking it's my job to avoid implementing government policy, you say instead, how do I exploit the policy in the best sense of that word? How do I be proactive about the policy to get the resources and the legitimacy to do things that I know are compatible somewhere within the policy, but we can control it? So that's the mindset part. So let's delve into this some more. I did this book, The Principle, 3 Keys to Maximizing Impact. It's really about school leadership, not just the principle, and it's really actually about leadership. But I want to take you through these 3 keys. And here are the keys. And the one that's most important is the bottom right-hand one. Principle as lead learner. What does that mean? Remember, all of our comments, all of our ideas are describable in precise terms. They're not just vague concepts, and that's what I'm going to operationalize. And then the agent of change gets us into skills related to that. So let's take a look at lead learner question. Here's the essence of it. As in the world, I guess I'll say this, that the growing movement for the role of the principal is to be a better pedagogical or instructional leader. And we agree with that. What does that mean? And the way that some people have translated is that the principal should get in to be a micromanager of how well are the teachers doing with checklists, with follow-up. Good idea sometimes, but nonetheless a micromanager. And you see this especially in several of the US states. You can go to New Jersey or Florida or almost anywhere, and what they've done and said, okay, we agree the principal should be instructional leader. Here are some, let's develop that role, so they have to go in and they evaluate teachers or give feedback to teachers. There actually isn't enough hours of the day to do that well, so it's totally impractical. But it's also not a motivator. So what is the alternative to that? If you do want to increase the focus on improved pedagogy, but how do you do that? And it turns out that there's a very good answer, and I've said the principal should direct their energies to developing the group, not the individual, but the group itself. And this makes it a lot more effective, and I'm going to show you a clip just to illustrate this. But it comes from research. If you look at that phrase, while learning alongside them, Vivian Robinson, one of the good researchers on the role of leadership, she's from Auckland, she did this meta studies of the role of the principal and what do we know about his or her impact on school-wide learning. And she came up with 5 factors. Some of them were things that are predictable. I'm going to focus on one of the 5, the strongest of the 5. Phrases like help establish the vision or the direction, get resources so people have time to work together and materials and that. But the one that was twice as important in effect sizes of the 5 was this following one. The degree to which the principal participates as a learner. That's the phrase. The degree to which the principal participates as a learner with teachers to move the school forward. This means, for example, the principal that is great at establishing the vision with the staff, gets some resources for them, but does not participate himself or herself in the details, is not very effective. If you're a principal and you do those things for 5 years, that is, you do the things from that one step removed from involvement, you don't learn very much. 5 times nothing is nothing. You're not engaged. If you do it from 5 years, you get better and you get better and you get better. And you have bigger impact because you're affecting the group. So this is attractive because it's doable. And it's attractive because you're actually helping develop the group and you yourself are learning a lot in doing that. So that's what we've been doing with the role of the principal. And that's how a lead learner is working to become more effective. There are various ways of looking at this. And I'm going to show you a 5-minute clip and the other 5 minutes later this afternoon. And I realized that we're doing in a lot of different countries now. I'll just tell you the method. We're doing it to be clear ourselves and actually to be effective at conveying this. And this school is in Ontario. It's probably not like your schools, but the themes are the same. Don't worry so much about technology. There's a bit of it there, but I'm going to come back to it this afternoon. But worry about the following 2 things. Focus on the following 2 things. What is the principal doing to shape the culture? And what's the role of teachers in this, individually and together? And in fact, I'll ask you to do this. If you turn to the person beside you, just 2 people, and one of you say, I'm going to focus on the principal, and the other of you say, I'm going to focus on the teachers. So I'll give you 30 seconds to do that. One, take the role of the principal. The other, take the role of teachers. Okay, let's come back. Let's get back together. Okay, that's not the assignment. That's just your role. All right, so take a look at this. And here's a school. It's grades 6, 7, and 8, so 11 to 14-year-olds, 12 to 15-year-olds. And it was before the start of this process, which you see a little glimpse of. Teachers were on their own. They were doing their own thing. Some were okay, some weren't okay, but there was no sharing whatsoever in the school. And this new principal came along. He's like many of the principals we have now, a good example of what the new stuff looks like. His name happens to be James Bond, but that's not a requirement to be this good. And in this, and so all I want you to do is to be sensitive. If you think about this, teachers and a principal, time 1. They're not interacting at all. Comes a catalyst. What does the interaction start to look like? And then I'll help you interpret it. So let's take a listen.
There is an element of explicitness that we've never really seen before.
Teachers are more excited. Students are more excited.
I see my role as being a student as
Do you ever help the teacher with technology?
yeah.
Every student, every teacher, every class. Yeah, we aren't doing that, and we really aren't meeting the goal of this award.
Rather than, this is my agenda as an educator, this is now our agenda, and that's grounding everything that we're doing.
here is a grade 6, 7, 8 school in Elmira, Ontario. We have a school population of 300 students, grade 6, 7, and 8 with French immersion as well, and one congregated developmental education class. The community is a small town community just located north of Waterloo, but our school is fed just from the school community.
Waterloo Region District School Board is approximately 60,000 students that we serve.
We have over 100 schools, secondary and elementary, with a variety of different organizations. We've really tried to focus on capacity building right across the organizations, and part of that is drawing upon the leadership. And we're learning together.
So when I started in September 2009, the trouble with year one is that as a staff all over the map will say our understanding of some of these high yield tools like gradual release, differentiated instruction. So whenever we did staff development, how do I meet everyone's needs and the staff? So there was trying to build everyone's capacity, but then also how to have them be comfortable with sharing and learning from each other. We had an old computer lab and basically just 2 old data projectors. So we had focused a lot on building the pedagogy. And then, as you can see, I started to purchase technology for the teachers, the smart boards, the document cameras, the data projectors. I think the main strategy is first that I'm learning with my teachers. That was the biggest thing, is to be with them, but also model everything, getting them comfortable with not knowing the answer in front of me.
This idea of it's okay to try something new and that I don't have to know everything right away, being able to go through that experience has made me be able to understand that, hey, this is exactly what the students are feeling in the class. So what we've done as a staff, and we've gone through an exercise of kind of plotting where you are and then seeing what's a small step that I could take. And then, okay, after that wasn't so bad. So now let's try another step. Having staff that are supportive, that are willing to share ideas, has been a huge help in terms of learning. It's been wonderful to have the devices in the classroom, because if you don't have it readily accessible, if you don't have your hands on it, then you just don't get the opportunity to play, to try, to be creative. And you really just have to be willing to try and know that sometimes you're going to fail, and that's okay. You learn from those mistakes, and other times it's going to be really successful and it's going to go well. We're going to focus on our writing for today. So each one of you is going to be posting a journal for today.
By the end of that year, every classroom now had a document camera and a data projector. Plus we had a number of smart boards in classrooms, but also still began acquiring more technology as we were learning about our students, building our capacity. We were able to develop our initial version of our accelerated learning framework, and we instituted our BYOD policy. That was really year one.
The skinny on the accelerated learning framework is that it is a graphic organizer that links teaching and learning to students. Students will need to develop 21st century skills. Creating, communicating, collaborating, critical thinking, and citizenship need to be embedded into what we do every day. Reaching out a little bit further is the exemplary pedagogy that teachers use. Reaching out a little bit further, we then look into the rich learning tasks that teachers develop for their students. We've been very fortunate to have quite a number of technological tools, but they certainly don't come before any of the other layers, and especially do not drive what's happening with our students.
And it doesn't matter whether I'm using the pedagogy or tools, if it's not going to help the student, why am I doing it? So it provides a good filter for me. How we do it is we use the framework to help identify what things we can do as a staff, together as a community of learners, to meet this ultimate learning goal for a graduating student. That's really the why, because if we have students come out like this, they're going to be successful in whatever they do.
So we've been working a lot on developing those 21st century skills, and today the big skill that we're really going to be focusing in on is critical thinking. So what I've tried to do is take the framework that we developed and now make it very explicit to students. So I can quickly, and we can decide what 21st century skills are we developing for any specific lesson and learning goal. So I use this board to really anchor the lesson, allow the students a very visual representation of how are we going to use the framework to accelerate our learning. Using the website and the Google form, set a goal for improvement, and articulate why you've chosen that goal. So what's the learning goal you picked?
I think I want to try and use more transition words. So I'm using this website, and it gives you how to use transition words.
It hasn't just been talking about 21st century skills. We have created these posters that allow students to very quickly and easily identify what does it actually mean to them. So we've taken the 6 C's from out of here, and I like to kind of work through things. I like to visually represent it. I like to also bring my students into it so that I can get their feedback on it to make sure they understand why we're doing things, get their ideas on how we can do it so that we can be successful. Communication, important for me to communicate with the students to share their ideas, and I also feel it's very important for us to communicate with parents. Collaborating, as I mentioned, students are always a part of what I do in the classroom for our lessons. It's not just me dictating, this is what we're doing, this is how we're going to do it. We're really trying to teach the students to be responsible citizens, and also how to use that technology appropriately, really wanting to put a focus on our student character development, creating, and then critically thinking. Another area that we've been working on and having those kids just, again, think outside of the box.
So year 2, we continue to focus still on looking at the pedagogy, because we found, okay, we've got this great framework, we're using this technology, but if we don't know it helps students, like how do we know?
Just quickly, the person beside you, literally, I'd say 3 minutes. If you took the role of the principal, name one thing you saw that stood out to you. If you took the role of the teacher, name one thing. Just a couple of sentences each. So 3 minutes, side by side. We would process this. I would ask you for your ideas. But because of our large group, I'm going to tell you what you should have seen, right? So what you see, and let's go from what's the biggest obstacle to change that people face psychologically? The fear of change, the biggest single obstacle. If you want to get change, the first thing you have to do is reduce fear. That's why punitive accountability doesn't work. You reduce fear. You saw James Bond say, okay, I want to be comfortable with people and my teachers in front of me saying, I don't know how to do this. I want to be comfortable saying to them, I don't know how to do it. So he creates this culture, literally, of a growth mindset culture now. This isn't just about the individual learning. This is the culture of the place. So a very strong, risk-free culture of learning where everyone declares publicly, the students, or the teachers to the students, I'm a learner too. That's what they say explicitly, out in the open. Secondly, they get serious about instruction and about the pedagogy. What do we have to know about pedagogy? Let's not get distracted by the technology too soon. What's our pedagogical base? You heard James say, we spent 2 years establishing the pedagogical base. Then we started to add technology because we knew how to sort it out then. So very much a pedagogy as the driver. Now we're going back to the right driver. And then with the principal's role, you see him there, he's not leading many meetings. He doesn't chair the meetings, but he participates and he offers suggestions, and he learns, and he'll consolidate things. So his knowledge base, by the year after year, gets stronger and stronger, gets more and more helpful, and he's able to do that. But he's not running the place that way. He's in there with the group deciding together. And the other very important thing, it's more subtle, very crucial, is the ability to talk the walk. Most of us will say, remember the old phrase, walk the talk. You have to behave the way you say you're going to behave. But this is different. This is doing something very specifically and being able to clearly explain it to yourself and to others, clearly. And so talking the walk, to me, is the big indicator they know what they're doing. And notice the subtle shift from the researcher to the practitioner. 5 years ago, I would have looked at Park Manor, and then I would have understood it as a researcher, and I would have written it up as a case study as a researcher, saying, here's a school that held all these things. I'm telling the story 5 years ago. Now, they're telling the story. I was there. I enabled it. We figured out what we want to do. We didn't script it, but I'm in the background, they're in the foreground. So this is crucial because this is when you know it sticks. This is know when they can spread it. If they want to, as they are doing now, working with other schools in the district, they're in a much better position to explain to other schools what they're doing because they've had lots of practice to it. So this is our new kind of indicator of success, is when schools and the multiple people in those schools can talk the walk, and when that talk is clear and consistent across people, you know you're on the right track. This video is, you can download it. We have recently in the habit the last couple of years of doing, their videos are about 10 or 11 minutes each. They're on my website, on my YouTube channel, so you can go to Park Manor and see this 10-minute. I'll just name 4. You can access another one, which is kindergarten to grade 3 in Garden Grove in California. So young kids up to the age of 8 or 9. And then we have 2 high school ones, one in California, one in Ontario. So this covers the gamut. They're all variations on the theme. And they're all this notion of how do we get at the other people's clarity, and then how do we make it available on the widespread basis. So 2 more ideas before, and incidentally in the Q&A part, I'll do a Q&A in the second session, the last half hour or so of the second session. That way we can take advantage of the day and have a whole bunch of things to talk about. So I won't do that here. But I have 2 more ideas to share with you at the beginning. These are compatible. This is the Professional Capital book that Andy Hargraves and I did. Is now available in Spanish from Maratha. We just got our copies the last week. And what we did in that book was, aside from the critique of the non-professional nature of the profession as it's evolving, we said, what would it look like if it was the right thing? And we said it consists of 3 kinds of capital. A little bit of jargon, but by capital we mean a resource. We mean a resource that's built up and can be invested for the future. In these cases, it's a human and social resource. So let's take each of these and comment on them. Human capital is the quality of the individual. So it's sometimes you can think of it as the personnel dimension and the human resource dimension. Most of you, I would guess, as school principals, are heavily figuring out human capital. I just lost a biology teacher. How do I replace that person with the best possible person? So I understand that getting good people is a big thing to do. But getting good people to come into a not so good culture is not a very good idea. It doesn't last. It kind of, they'll leave sooner than not. So the reason we've emphasized this, or de-emphasized it, is that while it's important, it tends to be the only thing that people think about. They don't think about the other 2 so explicitly, so we wanted to build up the other 2 and have this put in that perspective. So still do this, but especially do number 2 and number 3. Number 2 is social capital, and social capital is the quality of the group. Quality of the group interacting. You saw a bit of it in Park Manor, but let me give you a very succinct illustration. We have a lot of these now. Carrie Liana is a business professor at the University of Pittsburgh in the US, and she has been studying social capital in schools and measuring mainly 3 things, only 3 things, I'll say. And I'm thinking of a study now, 135 elementary schools in New York City, and these are the 3 things she measured in that sample. One was human capital, got the resumes of the teachers and say, what qualifications, etc. Secondly, and one of the first attempts, and we're doing this now, she measured social capital. Social capital with questions like this to teachers. To what extent do you and other teachers in the school work in a collaborative, focused way to improve the learning of all students in the school? And if a lot of teachers said, that's the way we work here, she said, here's a school with higher social capital. And then she measured math achievement from September to June. What was the increase in math achievement? You can see where I'm going with this. Yes, she found if a teacher had high human capital, they tended to get good results. But the schools that got the best results had high social capital. You can see why that would be the case. The groups leveraging each other up. And she also found that on the average, teachers with lower human capital who happened to be teaching in a school with higher social capital also got math achievement improvement. what they were learning was rubbing off from their colleagues. So very important part of this. A lot of our strategies are based on social capital within the school and across schools, which we won't say so much about maybe this afternoon. So this is very important. We were almost going to stop there, Andy and I, when we were writing the book, and say, okay, we've got it. And then we started to worry about one thing, and this is why we added decisional capital. We worried about this. Let's say you had teachers working together and learning from each other. But let's say they weren't very advanced in their work. What's happening there? They're learning each other's ineffective practice without knowing it. Not on purpose, but it's not built in. So we said, we better also, and again, the rest of the day we'll see some of this, we better also know about the precision of knowledge we're talking about, the pedagogy, and decisional capital. How do you get better at it? By immersing yourself. It's, Malcolm Gladwell made the 10,000 hour rule famous. How do you get better at something? Practice and reflection and skill and learning back and forth. And if you do that for the hypothetical 10 hours or the real 10 hours, you become an expert. So what we want is the group to become experts, more and more experts over this. You could accelerate this 10,000 hours probably with better and more powerful learning. But this is the combination that's going to do this. And we've just, Andy's team and our team have just developed an index to measure the 3 dimensions, 15 items in each index, and we're trying it out actually in different languages. It'll be available in January. It's done, but we want to pilot test it a little bit more. So this is really trying to bring into the framework. And if you're in a school, I'm going to say to you, you have to get these 3 things right in combination in order to be effective. So want to get to a couple of things here. Here's some just reflections on this work. Talented schools will improve a weak teacher. Right? What I said about the teacher with lower human capital working with a school with lots of talent, it rubs off on you. Talented teachers will leave a weak school. They want to make a difference, and they're being held back by the culture. They're not going to stay there if they have a choice. Right? Here's what I like. These are all our own formulations from what we're seeing, but it's our own language. Good collaboration reduces bad variation. What is a bad variation? Bad variation is ineffectiveness in teaching. So when you collaborate, you actually get more consistent. And when you get more consistent, it means the ineffective teaching falls by the side because you're getting more focused. And eventually we have to worry about innovation there so that you're not just too locked in. But the good part about collaboration is you sort out what's effective and what's ineffective. And this last one was a bit of a mouthful, the whole sentence, but the strength and sustainability of a school is a function of the quality of its lateral relationships. The stronger the lateral relationships, the more sustainable it is. Because if you have strong lateral relationships and the principal leaves, it's not as consequential. Because you've got the culture. If the new principal comes in who doesn't know how to run a collaborative school, you could lose ground, but you've got strength in the culture. That's what you want as a principal. You want to leave behind a strong culture that's collaborative and sustainable. So those are the things that we are working on now. Just think this is a little test, and I won't dwell on it too much. It's actually a setup. If I ask you about those 3 policy elements, strategies, which of the 3 is going to have a greater impact on teachers, teacher learning, teacher performance? Teacher appraisal, even if it's good, will not have a big impact on the whole school because it's too episodic. It's not intense enough. It only happens now and then. When you combine it with the wrong driver, negative accountability, which is what's happening in the States in the form of teacher evaluation, you have a double negative. Which is that the problem is that it demotivates, it's not strong enough no matter how you do it. Professional development. I don't want to eliminate it or omit it, but let's think of it this way. Professional development, such as this conference. Professional development, such as workshops, taking master's degree. All good knowledge, but not necessarily an organizational format. Our colleague, one of our colleagues in Melbourne, Australia, wrote an intriguing article a few years ago. It had the following title, Professional Development, a great way to avoid change. How could that be? What he found was people go to workshops and conferences, but not enough happens in between conferences. So again, it's not throwing professional development out, it's saying the culture is the driver here. Have professional development build the culture. Don't think that professional development will do a world of good on its own, because it won't. So very important things. Last kind of anchor, and then I'm going to conclude after that. Here's something I did recently just to pull out the pedagogical and the change knowledge. And if you notice here on the top continuum, it's the degree of explicitness of the pedagogical practice. So down below, I've defined explicitness as specificity, precision, data evidence. We'll get a better definition from Jay later, more detailed. But the detailed one is what kind of instructional design and structural implementation precisely, explicitly, is going to be effective. You might think that that's enough, but it's not enough, because when you introduce the change climate, which is the process of change led, which we say has to have at least those characteristics, non-judgmental, which means you have a growth mindset for the culture, some innovation, collaboration for sure, leadership, trust. You saw it all in Park Manor. So you put these two things together, and let's take a look then at what you get. Top left-hand quadrant, where there's low explicitness and a good change climate. This means it's not very precise, but people are getting along. It also means that people are getting along, but they're not doing much, right? So let's call it what it is, superficiality. We have to worry about superficiality. Even though people feel good because they're friendly, this is not good enough for what we want, what you want. If you go to the bottom left hand, we don't have that so much, but this is back to the days behind the classroom door. Inertia. Some classrooms get better, others don't, but there's no interaction, there's no leverage for it, it just drifts along. Let's take the bottom right hand one. This is the English problem. Remember I started with the English literacy and numeracy strategy? They got increasingly precise, but they didn't work enough on ownership. So this is what we got, resistance. They got the answer was pretty good actually, but it wasn't owned, people didn't understand it, they weren't good enough, it didn't have any ownership or longevity, and therefore what we need to aim for is the top right-hand one, where you integrate good ideas in a good change climate. You integrate the two on a continuous basis, and you get both precision and ownership. Okay, let me close with two things, system player and change agent skills. System players, we use the word systemness, which is another, not a real word, but a real concept. All I mean by systemness is the degree to which a teacher or any individual identify and engages with an entity larger than their own particular role. So we can do the building blocks here. When a school becomes collaborative the way that Park Manor has, the following things happen. Individual teachers stop thinking about my kids only in my classroom and start thinking about our kids in the whole school. That's all I mean by systemness. They contribute and benefit to the bigger picture, in this case, the school. When schools are in networks and they work interactively, as we've seen time and again, individual principals in the network start to be just as much concerned almost as for the success of other schools as their own, even though it's sometimes a competitive nature. And incidentally, on the competitive side, and I haven't got time to spell it out, but Andy's independent research and our research has concluded the same thing, which is that cooperation and competition are not either or. You can have both, and you have to figure out how to do that. Andy's latest book that just came out a month ago is called Uplifting Leadership. And in the Uplifting Leadership, they studied high performance in the business sector, the education sector, and sports. And they have 6 uplifting leadership skills coming from that. One of them is cooperation and competition. So especially for independent schools, you have to take the risk of being part of a network. You have to take the risk that really a lot of good companies are doing, say, we're not going to hold our ideas close to our chest. We're actually going to spread them for For one reason is we think the competition will be good because we'll be forced to be even better and that. And secondly, even more selfishly, I guess, people can never be able to steal our culture. They can steal our ideas, but they'll never steal our culture. So we're actually not that worried because it takes a long time to get the culture that we did. So there's a spirit of openness about system player. I've defined it this way simply: contributes to the bigger picture. That bigger picture may be just the school. Benefits from the bigger picture because of the culture gets better, you benefit. And then in our new work, interact laterally and vertically. This means across schools and between schools and that. So that last thing, and principle, or this is really anybody as a change agent. A lot of the work we're now doing is spelling out the skills and actually then being able to diagnose them and support them, all in the context of school and system change. But simply, I think leadership is this definition, succinctly. The leader who's able to move people and organizations forward under difficult circumstances. It's all difficult now. So what does this really mean? I want to take up a couple of interesting things. Steve Jobs, I'm not him per se, but I want to introduce an interesting way of thinking about this that I took up in the book. What's the relationship between passion and skills? What's the relationship? And I want to start in an odd way by saying, is it possible to have too much passion? Is it possible to have too much moral imperative? And the answer when you think about it is yes. One, if you have so much passion you don't listen, you are authoritarian, you push without listening, push without developing the group, that's not very good. A worse one is you have a lot of passion and not much skill. I could say that's dangerous. I don't want to work for a leader who's full of passion but doesn't have any skill. So we want to kind of take both of those and say they're both needed. The other direction is more helpful. What if you don't have a lot of passion for your work? What if you don't have a lot of fire in your belly? The least helpful thing I can say to you is be more passionate. Right? What are you going to do with that? Are you going to wake up in the morning and whip yourself into a frenzy every day and go to work that way? And here's the answer. And I take it up in the book and I connect it to its source. But the answer is this. If you don't have a lot of fire in your belly, and it may be for very good reasons, maybe the school climate's not very good, maybe the policies are bad, maybe you used to have it, but now it's been beaten down, whatever the reason. If you want to get better and stronger about your passion, here's the single, practical, doable answer: develop your skills. Develop your skills and you will find greater passion. Develop your skills at pedagogy. Develop your skills at collaboration. And the good thing about developing your skills is you can take them with you when you move to another position. It's an investment of your own human capital that you can take forward. And that's it's obviously a two-way street, but it's also the most important one. Okay, this one I don't think we'll do. Go. I want to just conclude with this. I'm working with some people here developing the skills and ideas, and this from Lyle Kurtman, who he and I just teamed up to do a book on this, integrating these ideas. And I just want to use this as a summary. You don't have to use them as a checklist or a one by one, but when he studied leadership, effective leadership, on the ground, this is why I like it, because it comes from the ground up. He said, what are these people doing at the school and school district level that are getting results? How do they go about their work? And he boiled it down to 7 factors, not in order, but this is a very good rendition of it because it comes from effective practice. It comes literally from what people are doing. And it also features something that I haven't dwelled on, which is another one of our conclusions is that all effective change is a combination, a judicious combination of push and pull factors. If you just push people, they rebel. If you just invite them and are just pulley, to use that language, nothing much happens. And so you got to use both. And this is what Lyle found. And so you can see interspersed there some pushy things. So challenges the status quo. This is the leader who says the present is not good enough. It's non-negotiable that we're going to stay the way we are. We have to change. We have to work on it. So that's obviously a push factor. Builds trust through clear communication and expectations. Very important one of getting, this is the two-way street between getting clear about what is the plan. Develops a commonly owned plan, very tricky, the implementation plan. Here's the kind of the short answer, and Doug Reeves put it best when he said it this way: the size and the prettiness of the implementation plan is inversely related to the quality of action. In other words, the better the plan looks on paper, the less effective it is, less impressive it is in practice. We want plans that are succinct, 2 or 3 pages, not 23 pages. We want them to be alive, sticky, actionable, and tied to it. That's what we actually do. Focuses on team over self. James Bond does this. He's a good leader, but he's building the team. Has a sense of urgency. Goes back to number 1, pushy again. Are we getting anywhere? What do the results show? We got to do better. Commits to continuous improvement for self. This is the leader as learner. And here's the quick way of thinking about it. The research shows pretty clearly that leaders have a more favorable impression of themselves than their followers do. Think about that. Leaders think they're doing better because that's human nature. They don't see their faults, so you have to go out of your way to keep getting better. Continuous learner. And finally builds external networks and partnerships, I would say even, but more accurately, especially if you're an independent school. How do you build partnerships, not just with communities and businesses, but laterally with other people doing similar work? I look very much forward to spending the whole day with you. We'll come back to this. We'll have a lot of things in between. Thank you very much.